Shabbat Shalom. Let me start with a mild trigger warning. This drasha, this teaching, will mention the atrocities of the Holocaust and those of October 7th. It will not, though, go into graphic detail. I'd like to dedicate this teaching of Torah to my wife, Rachel, whose kindness and perseverance and grace allowed me to leave our family for 2 weeks to participate in the March of the Living, and who took on all pieces of home life and parenting during my absence. I also dedicate this drasha to the memory of Rachel's grandparents, Motek Salve, Rushka Yosefovich, Barak Hindel, and Cirla Finkelstein, all Polish Jews and all survivors of Auschwitz, who somehow rebuilt their lives after the Shoah. This past Monday, it is Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Memorial Day for fallen soldiers and victims of terror. I am standing at the site of the Nova Festival massacre outside Kibbutz Re'im in the Gaza envelope. Every few minutes, I hear booms in the distance. I am here with my March of the Living group that includes 14 teens in grade 11 and 2 Holocaust survivors. For the past 12 days, we have been bearing witness to the tragedy of the Shoah, the Holocaust, and to the tragedy of October 7th in Israel. We have all dealt with what we've seen and heard in different ways: ghettos, cemeteries, memorials, concentration camps, death camps, survivor testimonies, ceremonies, Kaddish. Some have cried. Actually, most have cried, including me. Some have asked, how could this have happened? Some have asked, why did this happen? Some have been quietly thinking and processing. But Nova was different for us. And I'll tell you why in a few minutes' time. Last year, in 2023, close to 140 Toronto teens participated in the march. This year, there were 14. This small but strong group left Toronto the day after Pesach, alongside a contingent of 22 university students, 40 adults, 6 survivor educators, their liaisons, and program staff. We traveled to Poland to bear witness to the horrors of the Shoah. By a quirk of the Jewish calendar, the parasha, the Torah reading for our Shabbat in Warsaw, was Acharei Mot, translated as after the death. The Torah's words reference the deaths of Aaron's 2 sons, but for our group, the words carried a different resonance. We, alongside thousands of other Jews from around the world, were back in Poland, celebrating Shabbat after all the death and destruction of 80 years before. During our week in Poland, we learned about the lives of Jews before the war, those who lived in cities, in towns, and in shtetls, those who were Jewishly observant and those who were secular, traditional and assimilated. As we all know, none of these distinctions mattered to the Nazis. We visited cemeteries and ghettos, forests with mass graves, concentration and death camps. We learned of the systematic destruction of our people. We marched from Auschwitz to Birkenau on Yom HaShoah in memory and defiance. And most significantly, we heard the testimony of our 6 survivor educators. This was the most special part of the Poland experience for me. Bli ayin hara, we all know that the opportunity to travel to Europe with survivors will not last much longer. For us to hear their stories, and in some cases, standing in the very places where their stories took place, and to see their strength and perseverance to revisit their trauma and channel it towards education is so inspiring. Again, we'll come back to this later. After our week in Poland, we arrived in Israel. Toronto's delegation was one of only 2 high school groups in the whole world that continued from Poland to Israel. Think about that and what it says about our community's commitment to Israel engagement. Now, for every March of the Living trip prior to this year, the Israel week was both the week of fun and decompression after the Poland experience, and also a demonstration of the renewal of Jewish life after the Shoah. To paraphrase Yossi Klein Halevi from earlier this week, right there, we traveled from the land of the powerless Jew to the land of Jewish power. From the place where Jewish powerlessness ultimately resulted in the murder of 6 million Jews, to the place where Jewish power has allowed a community of 600,000 Jews to grow to 7.2 million Jews in only 76 years. But this year, of course, is drastically different. As Yossi said on Tuesday night, Israelis are still reliving October 7th every day, as are many of us. And so instead of Israel being a point of contrast to Poland, it was a place of continuation. Once again, we visited cemeteries. Once again, we stood in fields where mass murder took place. Once again, we heard survivor testimony and testimony from families of hostages. Once again, we saw memorials. Once again, we took part in ceremonies. Once again, we heard the stories and saw the evidence of the intentional murder of our people. And yes, we climbed Masada, we floated in the Dead Sea, we planted trees with JNF, we visited the Israel Guide Dog Center, we walked through Shuk HaCarmel in Tel Aviv, we ate shawarma, falafel, shakshuka, and more. Just as it was poignant to be in Poland for Parashat Acharei Mot, we were in Jerusalem for the Shabbat of Parashat Kedoshim, which translates as holiness. Parashat Kedoshim, in our holiest city, in our holy land, doing the holy work of bearing witness, education, and building identity. We felt the holiness of not only the place, but also of the people. This was most evident in our interactions with soldiers. Every one of them understands that they are fighting not only for their land, but for the entire Jewish people. Their morale is high. They feel confident that they will accomplish the task they have in front of them. As opposed to the Israeli public who seem tired, frustrated, angry, and even broken, the soldiers carry an energy and a resolve that is unwavering. Let us return to Yom HaZikaron and the site of the Nova Festival massacre. Upwards of 360 people were murdered at Nova, the majority of whom were under the age of 30. The memorial there resembles a cemetery, row after row of photos of each person killed or kidnapped, flowers, both real and ceramic, notes and trinkets. And just like at Treblinka, Majdanek, Birkenau, and Auschwitz, there are no bodies buried there. The memorial stands as a tribute to the lives taken away, to the shattered worlds of the families, friends, country, and people of these souls. We pray that those taken captive from Nova, along with all the other hostages currently being held in Gaza, return home to their families as quickly as possible. All trip, our survivor educators had been beacons of strength and resilience for the rest of us. Not only had they survived the Shoah and managed to build new lives in Canada, they have chosen to return to Poland year after year in their old age to help young people internalize the lessons of the Shoah through their individual testimonies and their presence. They held us up as we walked through Poland. They told us to be strong and showed us their strength. And that is why it was so devastating to see their reaction to Nova. They cried. They asked how and why. They stood and shook their heads and shed tears at the enormity and inhumanity of what had taken place. And of course, so did we. The freshness of the tragedy was too much, especially when experienced through the lens of our previous 12 days. The very thing that was supposed to never happen again to the Jewish people or any people had happened. And it happened in the state of Israel to Israelis who once again were murdered for either being Jews or being in the presence of Jews. It is moments like this and trips like these that add the third important P word to those of powerlessness and power. That word is peoplehood. Perhaps more than ever before, the Jewish people have a shared destiny. Israelis understand that the situation for Jews in the diaspora has deteriorated over the last few months. Diaspora Jews understand that Israelis, and particularly Israeli soldiers, are defending and strengthening their state not only for its citizens, but also for Jews around the world. It is this feeling of peoplehood that the adults on the March of the Living High School trip have tried to instill in the teen participants. When we at Beth Tzedec hosted Alex Edelman last month, during his conversation, again right here, with Talia Schlanger, he shared how he connects to Shabbat across both time and space. He said that when he celebrates Shabbat, he feels connected to all the Jews celebrating Shabbat that week, and also to Jews who have celebrated Shabbat in our past. Unfortunately, the same x-axis and y-axis of time and space can be applied to Jewish tragedy and trauma. Through the sites we visited, through interacting with our survivor educators, and by visiting Israel, we lived this. And it is these connections to each other and to our history, the bitter ones and the sweet ones, hamar v'hamatok, that are what it means to be Jewish. Back to Nova one last time. As a group, in that moment, we somehow found enough strength to hold each other up. We kept going. We were overwhelmed by, but not overcome by, the tragedy. We were able to continue our day and our trip. Our survivor educators told us that we had to be strong, that we must raise our voices to both hatred and indifference, and that we must celebrate life whenever we can, just like this morning. This week is Parashat Emor, meaning to tell or to speak. Once again, the Torah reading calendar gives us a gift. So in addition to sharing these reflections so far, let me leave you with the words and thoughts I shared with our group at Auschwitz the day after Yom HaShoah. Most, if not all of us, are familiar with the infamous words that stretch across the entrance to Auschwitz. Arbeit macht frei. Work will set you free. So much of what the Nazis did was so insidious and deceptive, and these three words, this bold-faced lie, capture the ideology so succinctly. Work at Auschwitz would not make anyone free. It would only delay the inevitable. Apparently, a number of years ago, the Arbeit macht frei sign was stolen. Who would want to steal it? I have no idea. When it was found and returned, those who run the Auschwitz Museum decided to put the original sign in secure storage and instead commissioned a replica sign to go in its place. I think that they missed an opportunity to rewrite the sign as a testament to the lessons of Auschwitz, of the Holocaust, and as it has turned out, of October 7th. Imagine if instead of the sign reading Arbeit macht frei, as it does, it read Arbeit macht Freiheit. Freiheit is the German word for freedom or liberty. My German grammar isn't good enough to rearrange the words, but let's use the ancient rabbinical method of saying, don't read it this way, but instead read it that way. Arbeit macht Freiheit. Don't read it as work brings you freedom. Rather, read it as freedom takes work. For most of my life, the freedom that I experienced as a Jew born in late 20th century Canada was something I took for granted. Why wouldn't I? Anti-Semitism and the Holocaust were things I learned about as history and memory, things that Canadian Jews were never going to experience again. But whether it was as a result of the Tree of Life massacre in Pittsburgh in 2018, the rhetoric around Israel and Jews in May of 2021, and certainly after October 7th, we can clearly see that the freedom from Jew hatred in late 20th century Canada was an exception to our history. We are back in a place and time where we need to work for our freedoms, to work to ensure that never again is taken seriously, to work to validate the right of the Jewish nation to live in its indigenous homeland under its own sovereignty. And more, and more, and more. Find your voice. Use your voice. Raise your voice. Advocate. Educate. Join with 14 deeply talented and passionate teenagers who are the next generation of Jewish leadership. And may they be joined by 140 of their peers next year once again. Am Yisrael Chai.